The holiday season had always been my favorite time of year. The air smelled of pine, the streets were lit with twinkling lights, and people seemed kinder, at least on the surface. For me, Christmas wasn't just about gifts or traditions. It was about family, the glue that held everything together. That's why, when my wife Alice started acting strange, I tried to ignore it. After all, 10 years of marriage teaches you to overlook the little things, right? She had been distant lately, less laughter, fewer shared moments, and a constant preoccupation with her phone. "It's work," she'd say whenever I asked. "They're piling on deadlines before the holidays." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. It was New Year's Eve when she dropped the bombshell. "I have a corporate party tonight," Alice said casually over breakfast, sipping her coffee as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I frowned. "A party? You never mentioned this before." She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. It slipped my mind. "You know how busy it's been." Something about her tone felt off, but I smiled, pretending not to notice. "All right, have fun. What time will you be back?" "Late," she replied a little too quickly. "Don't wait up." I should have questioned her more. Instead, I kissed her on the cheek, told her to enjoy herself, and watched her walk away. That was the last normal moment we shared. The day passed slowly, as if the universe itself sensed my unease. Alice left in the early evening, dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. She looked stunning, but something about her demeanor gnawed at me. She wasn't just excited. She was nervous. Her eyes darted to her phone more than usual, and her smile seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to convince me, and maybe herself, that everything was fine. "Don't forget to eat dinner," she called out as she grabbed her purse. "I'll be late." Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she walked out the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty hallway, a strange hollowness settling in my chest. I tried to shake it off. Paranoia wasn't like me. Alice was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with. Yet, as the hours dragged on, my thoughts kept circling back to her. Why hadn't she mentioned this party earlier? Why had she been so guarded about it? Around 8 p.m., I called one of her coworkers, Jenna, under the guise of holiday cheer. Jenna was the chatty type, the kind of person who'd tell you her life story if you let her. After some small talk, I casually brought up the party. "Oh, the office party?" Jenna laughed. "That was last week. We don't have anything tonight. Everyone's at home with their families." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hung up quickly, mumbling some excuse about a bad connection. My mind was racing. If there was no corporate party, where was Alice? And more importantly, who was she with? For a moment, I considered letting it go. Maybe I'd misheard Jenna. Maybe there was another party she didn't know about. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. The seeds of doubt had already been planted, and they were growing fast. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. Should I call Alice? Demand an explanation? No, that would tip her off. If she was lying to me, I needed proof. And so, against every instinct I had, I grabbed my coat and keys and stepped out into the cold December night. The city was alive with New Year's Eve celebrations. Streets were bustling with couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing, and children marveling at the decorations. But I wasn't here to celebrate. My focus was razor-sharp, my heart pounding in my chest as I drove aimlessly, trying to figure out my next move. I had no idea where to start looking. Alice hadn't mentioned a specific venue, and the city was full of restaurants, bars, and event spaces. Then I remembered something: her phone. She'd been glued to it all day, even more than usual. If she was meeting someone, there had to be a trail. Pulling over to the side of the road, I accessed our shared phone plan account on my laptop. It wasn't something I'd ever done before. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. But tonight, trust felt like a distant memory. Within moments, I found her location. My heart sank as I saw the blinking dot on the map. She wasn't at an office or event hall. She was at an upscale restaurant across town, a place we'd never been to together. I drove there in silence, the hum of the car engine the only sound accompanying my swirling thoughts. When I arrived, I parked across the street and killed the lights, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. Through the large glass windows of the restaurant, I spotted her almost immediately. Alice sat at a corner table, leaning forward with a look of excitement and warmth I hadn't seen in months. And then I saw him. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and an expensive suit that screamed wealth. He reached across the table to touch her hand, and she didn't pull away. My chest tightened as I watched them laugh, their heads leaning closer together. I wanted to storm in, to confront them both right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was a desperate need for undeniable proof. Either way, I stayed in the car, watching the woman I thought I knew betray me in real time. When the waiter brought their wine, they toasted, their glasses clinking softly against the backdrop of the restaurant's muted chatter. Alice looked radiant, her smile wide and genuine. It wasn't a smile meant for me. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my trance. It was Alice. When I saw Alice's name flash on my phone screen, my heart skipped a beat. For a moment, panic surged through me. Had she seen me? Did she somehow know I was there, watching her? My hand hovered over the screen as the phone buzzed insistently. Finally, I answered, forcing my voice into a calmness I didn't feel. "Hey," I said, my tone as neutral as I could manage. "Hi, love," Alice replied, her voice light and cheerful. Too cheerful. "Just checking in. What are you up to?" I glanced out the car window at the restaurant, at the woman I loved sitting just a few yards away, laughing and drinking with another man. My fingers gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. "Not much," I lied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Just watching a movie. What about you? How's the party?" "Oh, it's fine," she said quickly, almost dismissively. "You know how these things are, small talk, boring speeches. Honestly, I can't wait to come home." Her words were like poison. Hearing her lie so effortlessly, so casually, was almost worse than seeing her with him. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to play along. "Well, don't stay too late," I said, my voice tinged with feigned concern. "It's New Year's Eve. I want to ring in the new year with you." There was a brief pause on her end, just long enough to make me wonder if she sensed something was off. But then she laughed softly, the sound so familiar yet suddenly so alien to me. "Of course," she said. "I'll be home soon. Love you." "Love you too," I replied, the words hollow as they left my mouth. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. My reflection in the screen looked like a stranger's, eyes wide with disbelief, lips pressed into a thin, hard line. This wasn't the woman I married. Or maybe it was, and I was just now seeing the truth. I looked back at the restaurant. Alice and the man, Jacob, as I would later discover, were still deep in conversation, their heads close together. She wasn't thinking about me. She wasn't thinking about the life we'd built or the promises we'd made. She was here, in this moment, with him. I grabbed my camera from the passenger seat, the one I usually used for family vacations and holidays. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. I rolled down the window slightly and focused the lens on the two of them, capturing their every smile, every touch, every stolen glance. The betrayal etched into those photographs wasn't just hers. It was ours. It was the death of every memory we'd shared, every dream we'd built together. And as I sat there, documenting her infidelity, I realized I wasn't just gathering proof. I was gathering the pieces of my broken heart. The restaurant buzzed with life, a sharp contrast to the icy stillness I felt inside. Through the lens of my camera, I watched Alice and Jacob as if they were characters in a tragic play. She tilted her head back, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a way that felt painfully intimate. My hands trembled as I adjusted the focus. The camera clicked softly, each photo a dagger to my chest. I told myself this wasn't real, that there had to be some explanation. But the evidence was right there, unfolding in front of me in vivid detail. As they finished their meal, the waiter brought the check, and Jacob reached for his wallet. Alice leaned in, whispering something to him, her lips so close to his ear that it made my stomach churn. He smiled and nodded, pulling out a black card to pay. They stood to leave, and for a moment, I panicked. What if I lost them? What if I couldn't follow without being seen? I ducked lower in my seat as they exited the restaurant, their silhouettes framed by the warm glow of the streetlights. Alice slipped her arm through Jacob's, and they walked down the street together, their laughter echoing in the cold night air. I started the car and followed at a safe distance, my headlights off to avoid drawing attention. They didn't go far, just a few blocks to a boutique hotel. My heart sank as they entered the building, the doorman greeting them with a knowing smile. I parked across the street, my mind racing. I couldn't go inside without being seen. But the thought of sitting here, doing nothing, was unbearable. I needed more than just photos of a dinner. I needed the truth, undeniable and unshakable. I stepped out of the car, pulling up the hood of my jacket against the biting wind. The hotel was small and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a glimpse into the lobby. Through the glass, I saw Alice and Jacob at the front desk, laughing as the receptionist handed them a key. They disappeared into the elevator, and I stood there, frozen. My world had already crumbled, but this was the final blow. Whatever shred of hope I'd clung to was gone. As I returned to my car, I realized the depth of my pain wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about the life we'd built, the love I thought we shared. Alice hadn't just lied to me. She'd rewritten our story, erasing everything I thought was real. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the hotel's glowing facade. The cold seeped in through the windows, but I barely felt it. My mind was too numb to process what had just happened. Alice, the woman I'd shared a decade of my life with, was upstairs in a hotel room with another man. And here I was, alone, clutching my camera like it was some kind of shield. The city around me buzzed with New Year's Eve energy. Groups of friends spilled out of bars, their laughter piercing the stillness of the night. Fireworks were already lighting up the sky in the distance, their colors bright and celebratory. It was the kind of night that was meant for joy and togetherness. Instead, it felt like I was living a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My phone buzzed again. For a moment, I thought it might be Alice, checking in with another carefully crafted lie. But it wasn't her. It was a text from a mutual friend, wishing us a happy new year and hoping we were celebrating together. The irony was almost too much to bear. I needed to think, to breathe. But every time I tried to calm myself, the image of Alice with Jacob flashed in my mind. Her smile, her laughter. It wasn't for me anymore, and that realization felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Unable to sit still, I opened my laptop again. My curiosity, or perhaps my desperation, drove me to dig deeper into the man she was with. Jacob. I'd heard his name mentioned once or twice in passing, always with that faint, dismissive tone Alice used when she didn't want me to ask questions. A quick search of his name brought up a LinkedIn profile. Jacob Harper, financial consultant, married. That last word stopped me cold. Married. The man my wife was with had a wife of his own. Her name was Megan, and her Facebook profile was surprisingly public. Pictures of a happy family stared back at me. A young woman with soft features, a bright smile, and a toddler balanced on her hip. For a moment, my anger shifted. It wasn't just my life falling apart. Megan was in the dark about what her husband was doing tonight, just as I had been an hour ago. And in that moment, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me sitting in a car wallowing in misery. If Alice and Jacob thought they could shatter lives without consequence, they were wrong. I wasn't just going to gather proof. I was going to make sure their lies came crashing down around them. The hotel lobby was quiet when I stepped inside, the warmth of the space almost suffocating after the biting cold outside. I kept my hood up, my head low, trying to blend in. My heart pounded as I approached the front desk, my mind racing with 100 different scenarios. "Good evening," the receptionist said, her voice polite but tired. She looked like she'd had a long night, and I planned to use that to my advantage. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, forcing a sheepish smile. "My wife and I just checked in, but she forgot her phone in the car. I can't remember the room number. Could you help me out?" The receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What's the name?" "Harper," I said, the lie slipping from my lips with surprising ease. "Alice Harper." She typed for a moment, then glanced at me. Room 312. I nodded, muttering a quick thank you before retreating to the elevator bank. My heart raced as I pressed the button for the third floor, the soft ding of the elevator doors opening almost making me jump. The hallway was silent, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. Room 312 was at the far end, its door closed tightly. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. Should I knock? Burst in? What if they caught me? I crouched down, placing my ear against the door. Muffled voices drifted through the wood, Alice's laugh, Jacob's deep, smooth tone. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The intimacy in their voices said it all. Pulling out my phone, I opened the camera app and snapped a photo of the door, the room number clearly visible. It was a small piece of evidence, but it mattered. Every detail mattered now. I didn't knock. I didn't burst in. Instead, I turned and walked back to the elevator, my legs feeling like lead. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan. As I drove home, the weight of everything hit me all at once. My marriage was over, that much was clear. But it wasn't just about ending things with Alice. It was about making sure she and Jacob couldn't walk away from this unscathed. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of the life we'd built together. Wedding photos, holiday cards, little knickknacks we'd collected over the years. It all felt hollow now, like relics from a life that no longer existed. I pulled out my phone and started drafting a message. Not to Alice. Not yet. This one was for Megan. The glow of the screen lit up the dark kitchen as I stared at Megan Harper's Facebook profile. Every photo felt like a punch to the gut. A smiling family on a beach vacation, Jacob holding their toddler on his shoulders, Megan's glowing face as she posed with him at what looked like an anniversary dinner. They were the picture of a happy family, a facade as carefully constructed as my own. I hesitated before typing out the first words of my message. How do you tell someone their entire world is a lie? I didn't know Megan, but in this twisted way, I felt connected to her. We were both victims of the same deceit, and I couldn't shake the thought that she deserved to know the truth. Finally, I began. Hi, Megan. My name is Daniel. I don't know how to say this, but I believe your husband, Jacob, is having an affair. I saw him tonight with my wife, Alice. I have proof and I thought you should know. Please let me know if you want to talk. I attached a few of the photos I'd taken at the restaurant, my fingers trembling as I hit send. The message felt like a loaded gun. Once fired, there was no taking it back. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wondered if I'd made the right decision. What if Megan didn't believe me? What if she lashed out, accused me of lying, or worse? What if she simply didn't care? Minutes passed, then hours. Midnight came and went, marked only by the distant sound of fireworks and cheers from the neighbors. Alice still hadn't returned home. At 1:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. I picked it up, my heart racing as I saw Megan's name. She had replied, Daniel, thank you for reaching out. I don't know what to say. This is devastating. Please, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Of course. I'll call you. My hands shook as I dialed her number. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice soft and unsteady. Hello, Megan, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how hard this must be. She took a shaky breath. Thank you for telling me. I had no idea. Jacob has been distant lately, but I thought it was work stress. I never thought. Her voice broke, and I could hear her trying to hold back tears. I know how you feel, I said, my own chest tightening. I've been in the dark too. Tonight was the first time I saw it for myself. For the next hour, we talked. Megan shared bits and pieces of her life with Jacob. How they met, how he'd changed after their child was born, how she'd ignored the small signs of trouble because she wanted to believe in their marriage. I told her about Alice, about the years we'd spent together and the lies I now realized she'd been telling. It was a strange, painful kind of therapy, two strangers bonding over shared heartbreak. By the time the call ended, we had a plan. Megan wanted to confront Jacob, but not before gathering more evidence. I agreed to help her, knowing that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closure for both of us. As I hung up, the house felt eerily silent. Alice still wasn't home, and I realized I didn't care anymore. The woman who'd left tonight wasn't the same woman I'd fallen in love with. She was a stranger, and the life we'd built was nothing but a lie. For the first time in hours, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. The sun was just beginning to rise when I heard the familiar creak of the front door opening. Alice was home. I sat in the living room, the dim light from a nearby lamp casting long shadows across the room. My hands were clasped tightly, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, sorrow, and determination. Alice stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She froze when she saw me sitting there, her face momentarily betraying a flicker of surprise before she composed herself. "You're up early," she said, her voice light, as if everything were normal. She slipped off her coat and hung it on the rack, avoiding my gaze. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone even. My eyes followed her every movement as she walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. "How was the corporate party?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Alice hesitated for a fraction of a second, so brief that someone who didn't know her as well as I did might have missed it. But I caught it. "It was fine," she said, her back to me. "Long and boring, as usual. You know how these things are." Her lies were so practiced, so effortless. It was almost impressive. Almost. "Did you see anyone you knew?" I pressed, my voice calm but sharp enough to make her shoulders tense slightly. She turned around, her smile forced. "Not really. Just the usual coworkers." For a moment, the room was silent. The air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken truths. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to lay out all the evidence and demand an explanation. But something held me back. Instead, I stood up and walked toward her. She flinched slightly, as if expecting me to lash out, but I stopped a few feet away, my voice low and steady. "I hope you enjoyed yourself," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "It's New Year's Day after all. A fresh start." She blinked, clearly caught off guard by my words, but she nodded quickly. "Yes, exactly. A fresh start." I let the moment hang between us before turning and heading upstairs, leaving her standing there in the kitchen. She didn't follow me, and I didn't look back. Upstairs, I shut the door to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. My mind was racing, but I knew I had to stay focused. Alice's lies wouldn't last forever, and when the time came, I'd be ready. Over the next few days, Alice seemed determined to act as if everything were normal. She smiled more, cooked dinners, and even suggested we watch movies together. On the surface, it might have looked like she was trying to reconnect, but I knew better. Her phone became my window into her double life. Late at night, when she was asleep, I'd carefully take it from her nightstand and go through her messages. There were texts from Jacob, nothing overtly incriminating, but the familiarity of their tone was unmistakable. "Jacob, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." "Alice, same. I miss you already." Each message was like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. I took screenshots of everything, adding them to the growing file of evidence. I also noticed she was being more cautious. Messages would disappear within minutes, likely deleted to cover her tracks. But even in her carefulness, she couldn't hide everything. Her call logs, her calendar, little breadcrumbs that painted a picture of a life I wasn't part of. Meanwhile, Megan and I stayed in touch. She was a quiet but determined ally, her anger fueling her resolve. We exchanged updates, sharing every new piece of evidence we uncovered. Megan told me she'd confronted Jacob about his frequent late nights at work, but he'd brushed her off with the same ease Alice had shown. "He thinks I'm clueless," Megan said during one of our calls. "Like I don't know what's going on." "We'll make sure he knows you're not," I replied, my voice grim. By the end of the week, I felt like I was living a double life of my own. During the day, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband, smiling at Alice's forced attempts at normalcy. At night, I delved deeper into her lies, each discovery solidifying my resolve. But the moment of reckoning was drawing closer, and I could feel it. The time for silence would soon be over. By the second week of January, the tension in the house was palpable. Alice continued her charade of being the perfect wife, but her facade was starting to crack. She grew more irritable, snapping at small things, and I noticed her glancing at me with suspicion when she thought I wasn't looking. Perhaps she sensed the shift, the quiet storm brewing beneath my composed exterior. For me, every interaction felt like a game of chess. I measured my words carefully, keeping my emotions in check. Each day brought new evidence, new confirmations of the betrayal, and my patience was wearing thin. But I needed to be strategic. A confrontation too soon could let her wriggle free from the consequences she so richly deserved. Meanwhile, Megan and I worked in tandem, piecing together a timeline of Alice and Jacob's affair. She had access to Jacob's financial records, and what she found was damning. Hotel receipts, expensive dinners at places Megan had never been, even a suspicious charge for a spa weekend. Combined with the messages I'd gathered, we had more than enough proof. "I'm not sure how much longer I can do this," Megan confessed during one of our late-night calls. Her voice was strained, tired. "Every time I see him holding our son, I want to scream at him. How can he pretend everything is fine? Because that's who they are," I said bitterly. "Liars. They've built their lives around lies, and they think they can keep getting away with it." There was a pause, and then Megan said something that stopped me cold. "What about Alice? What if she denies everything when you confront her?" I hadn't considered that. The idea of Alice twisting the truth, turning the blame on me, was infuriating but not unthinkable. She'd lied so effortlessly before. Why would this be any different? "She won't have the chance," I said finally. "I'll make sure she can't talk her way out of this." That Saturday, Alice announced she had errands to run. Her tone was casual, but I knew what she really meant. I waited until she left, then followed her at a safe distance. Her car led me to a small park on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, the kind of place where couples could meet without drawing attention. Sure enough, Jacob was there, leaning casually against his car. Alice walked up to him, her smile wide and genuine in a way it hadn't been around me in months. I parked far enough away to avoid suspicion but close enough to capture everything with my camera. Through the lens, I watched as they embraced, their movements intimate, familiar. My stomach churned, a sick mix of anger and despair flooding my veins. Jacob handed Alice a small gift bag, and she laughed, her head tilting back in that carefree way I used to love. I took photo after photo, documenting every moment. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. When they finally parted ways, I followed Alice back home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She walked into the house with the same nonchalance she'd left with, as if nothing had happened. "Hey," she said when she saw me in the kitchen. "I picked up some groceries. Thought we could have a nice dinner tonight." Her audacity was staggering. I nodded, playing along, but inside, I was seething. That night, as she slept beside me, I opened my laptop and compiled everything. The photos, the messages, the receipts Megan had provided. It was all there, a damning case against both of them. I stared at the screen, my anger simmering. This wasn't just about exposing Alice and Jacob anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about making sure they couldn't continue to hurt the people who trusted them. When I finally closed the laptop, the decision was made. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. The morning began in eerie silence. Alice was up early, humming softly to herself as she moved about the kitchen. She seemed lighter, as though the burden of her lies had become easier to bear. Or perhaps she thought she had me fooled. I sat at the dining table, nursing a cup of coffee, watching her with an intensity she didn't notice. My mind was elsewhere, rehearsing the confrontation I'd planned. Every word, every moment had to land perfectly. There was no room for hesitation. "Busy day ahead?" she asked, glancing at me with a smile that now felt like poison. "Not too bad," I replied casually, setting my mug down. "What about you? Any plans?" She shrugged. "The usual. Laundry, cleaning, maybe catch up on some emails." Her ease was infuriating. She had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, Megan and I finalized the plan. We'd agreed to confront them simultaneously, ensuring neither Alice nor Jacob had the chance to warn the other. Megan had invited Jacob to lunch under the guise of needing to talk about their relationship, while I decided to confront Alice in the one place she couldn't run from, our home. At exactly 2 p.m., Megan texted me, "He's here. Ready when you are." I took a deep breath and walked into the living room, where Alice was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Alice," I said, my voice steady. She looked up, surprised by my tone. "What's up?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf, where I'd placed a manila envelope containing the evidence. Pulling it out, I set it on the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Open it," I said, taking a step back. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope. When she pulled out the photos, the ones of her and Jacob at the restaurant, the park, and the hotel, her face went pale. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "You tell me," I replied coldly. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel, this isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me, Alice. I followed you. I watched you with him. I have the texts, the photos, even receipts. Don't you dare sit there and tell me it's not what it looks like." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually feel remorse. But instead of apologizing, she tried to turn the tables. "You've been spying on me?" she snapped, her voice rising. "What kind of husband does that?" "A husband who trusted you," I shot back. "A husband who gave you the benefit of the doubt until you proved me wrong." She stood, clutching the photos to her chest. "You don't understand. It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's not. You lied to me, Alice, for months. You threw away everything we built for what? A fling? A man who's cheating on his wife, just like you're cheating on me." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The weight of the truth had rendered her speechless. "Jacob's wife knows," I added, watching her face crumble further. "She has the same evidence I do. So whatever fantasy you two thought you were living, it's over." She sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "That doesn't change the fact that it did," I said. My voice softened, but only slightly. "Alice, I loved you. I would have done anything for you. But this I can't forgive." As I walked out of the living room, my phone buzzed. It was Megan. He admitted everything. "Thank you for giving me the strength to confront him. I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow." I typed back, "Good. You deserve better. We both do." I stood by the window, staring out at the street as the sun began to set. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace. The lies were over. The truth was out. And while the road ahead would be difficult, it would at least be honest. The hours after the confrontation passed in a blur. Alice stayed in the living room, silent and motionless, while I locked myself in the bedroom, needing space to process what had just happened. My heart was heavy, but there was also a strange clarity. I had done what needed to be done, and there was no turning back. By evening, Alice finally knocked on the bedroom door. Her voice was tentative, fragile. "Daniel, can we talk?" I opened the door but didn't step aside to let her in. Instead, I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "What is there to talk about?" I asked, my tone weary but firm. Her eyes were red and swollen, evidence of hours spent crying. She looked older, worn down by the weight of her own actions. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you. I made a terrible mistake." "Mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me." She flinched at my words but pressed on. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I'll end things with Jacob. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. "Fix this? Alice, you shattered our marriage. There's nothing left to fix." Her lip quivered, but I didn't feel the sympathy I once might have. The woman standing before me wasn't the person I thought I'd married. "I think you should stay somewhere else for a while," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "I need time to figure out what's next, and I can't do that with you here." She looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. Instead, she nodded silently and turned away, retreating down the hallway. The next morning, Alice packed a bag and left without saying much. The house felt strangely empty without her presence, but it was a relief more than a loss. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy. I went back to work, threw myself into projects, and avoided questions from coworkers about how my holidays had been. At home, I cleaned out the remnants of our shared life. Photos, trinkets, anything that reminded me of the woman who had betrayed me. Megan and I stayed in touch, though less frequently now that the immediate crisis had passed. She updated me on her progress with the divorce, her voice growing stronger and more resolute with each conversation. "I confronted him in front of our families," she told me one evening. "He couldn't deny it anymore. My parents were furious, and his were, well, embarrassed, to say the least." "Good for you," I said, genuinely impressed. "You deserve to move on without his lies hanging over you." "You too, Daniel," she replied. "We both do." A week later, I received a manila envelope in the mail. Inside were divorce papers, neatly typed and ready for my signature. Alice had taken the first step, and for that I was grateful. It saved me the trouble of initiating the process myself. As I signed the documents, a strange sense of closure washed over me. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Before sealing the envelope, I added a note. "Alice, I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for. But it wasn't me. Goodbye." It had been a few days since I signed the divorce papers, but the weight of what had happened still hung over me like a storm cloud. Alice was gone, but I wasn't sure I had the strength to move on yet. Every part of our house still felt like her, from the scent of her perfume lingering in the bedroom to the framed photos we had taken during our vacations together. The memories of the life I had thought we were building kept flashing before me, as if trying to haunt me into submission. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the man who had once trusted her, believed in her. I was someone who had been betrayed, and now I had a chance to show the world the truth, no more lies. I had been patient for far too long, and now it was time for the final piece of the puzzle. Jacob. I knew he wasn't going to come clean on his own, not after everything I had seen. He'd probably convinced himself that he was untouchable, that his affair with Alice was some private, untold story. But he was wrong. I had all the proof I needed to destroy his image, to expose him for what he truly was, and I couldn't let him get away with it. So I made the decision. I wouldn't just leave it between Alice and me. I was going to take this one step further and make sure Jacob's wife knew the full extent of the betrayal. She deserved the truth just like I had. I reached out to Megan for help, explaining what I had planned. She understood immediately. "Do it," she said. "Let her know what kind of man her husband really is." And so, I gathered everything, every message, every photo, every receipt, and put it together in one email. Along with the photos of Alice and Jacob, I attached the incriminating text exchanges and the hotel and restaurant charges. It felt cold, almost clinical as I reviewed the evidence one final time. But I knew it was necessary. With a deep breath, I sent the email. To Jacob's wife. Subject: "The truth you deserve. I'm sorry to have to do this, but I believe you have the right to know. Your husband, Jacob, has been having an affair with my wife, Alice, for several months. I have attached evidence of their meetings, including photos, text messages, and receipts that prove their betrayal. This is not something I do out of malice, but out of respect for you. I hope you find peace and clarity, and I wish you strength as you navigate the truth. Please understand that I didn't want to go down this path, but I felt you deserved the truth." I clicked send, and the weight on my chest felt almost unbearable. This wasn't a simple revenge story. It was about justice, about letting the truth rise to the surface, no matter how ugly or painful it was. It wasn't long before I received a response. The subject line was blunt, almost chilling. I knew. The message was short, but the words burned in my chest. I knew about the affair, but seeing the proof, It's different. Thank you for telling me, even though it hurt. I'll be handling this with Jacob soon. I stared at the email for a long time, my mind a swirl of emotions. She had known, but she hadn't had the courage to act. I understood that feeling, sitting in the shadows, knowing something was wrong but not wanting to face it. And then, as if by instinct, I picked up the phone and called her. The conversation was awkward, tense. She sounded drained, defeated. I could hear the pain in her voice, the realization that her life, like mine, was falling apart. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "I just wanted you to know that you deserve the truth." There was a long pause. "I appreciate that," she said. "I'll be filing for divorce, and I'll make sure Jacob pays for everything he's done." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. We both deserve better. As the days went on, I saw less and less of Alice. She'd left the house completely, and I didn't hear from her at all. The house felt oddly peaceful now, like the fog had finally cleared. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, and I felt like I was taking steps in the right direction, even if those steps were small. Megan was doing well too. She'd filed for divorce and was working on a custody arrangement for their son. The two of us had become a sort of support system for one another, strangers in the same storm, trying to find our way to calmer waters. But even as we both moved forward, there was still one thing gnawing at me. The image of Alice and Jacob together, laughing, living a lie while I watched from the sidelines. I knew I had to let go, that there was no turning back. But some days it felt impossible. The weeks passed in a slow, almost painful march forward. Each day felt like I was putting another piece of myself back together. The first few days without Alice in the house were strange, as if the world had tilted slightly off its axis. I woke up in a cold sweat, not because of nightmares, but because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I had lived in the shadow of Alice's betrayal, and now I had to figure out how to exist without the weight of it constantly pressing down on me. Work had become my sanctuary. The familiar rhythm of meetings, deadlines, and emails provided a temporary escape from the chaos of my personal life. But even at work, I was constantly reminded of the mess I was in. My colleagues were sympathetic but cautious, unsure of what to say or how to act. And that was fine. I didn't need anyone's pity. But in the evenings, when the office lights went dark, and I came home to an empty house, the silence would settle over me like a blanket of cold despair. It was in those moments, alone in the dark, that the memories of Alice, her laughter, her warmth, the life we once shared, would creep back in, whispering to me, reminding me of everything I had lost. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, the phone buzzed. It was Megan. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what she needed. But I knew it wasn't just a casual conversation. Megan had become a lifeline, and I had to know what she was going through. "Sure, what's up?" I replied, typing quickly. Her message came through immediately. "I saw him." I stared at the screen, the words hanging there like a brick in my stomach. I knew who she meant. Jacob. I waited for her to elaborate. "He came by today. He wanted to talk about us." But all I wanted to do was scream at him. It felt like I was back in that place again, the place where he thought he could control everything. He's trying to make it seem like he's the victim, Daniel. Like he's the one who's been hurt. I could hear the fury in her words, the same anger I felt every time I thought about Alice. "He's not the victim, Megan," I typed back. "He's the one who created all of this. The lies, the manipulation. He's the one who should be ashamed, not you." Her next message came a few minutes later. "I know, but it's hard, Daniel. He's a good liar. He's convincing, but he's also a coward." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "You're stronger than him. You always have been. Don't let him twist it into something it's not." Thanks for saying that. I needed to hear it. It felt good to offer her that kind of support. It reminded me that despite everything, I wasn't alone in this. Over the next few days, I began to find a sense of peace in the chaos. I spent time focusing on myself, reading, exercising, rediscovering old hobbies I had forgotten about. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I knew I was ready to walk down it, no longer weighed down by the shadows of the past. Then came the email. It was from Alice. For a moment, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I hadn't heard from her since I sent the divorce papers. I had no idea what to expect, but I was certain it wasn't going to be a pleasant message. I opened it. Daniel, I don't know where to begin, or if I even should. I owe you an apology, but words don't seem to be enough. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't know how to make up for them. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you. I know I ruined everything, and I can never undo that. I'm leaving the city, starting fresh. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. It was a simple message, heartfelt even, but it didn't move me the way I thought it might. In some strange way, it felt like too little, too late. I stared at the screen for a long time, wondering if there was something I should say back. But no response came. Not because I couldn't forgive her, but because I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need closure from her. The only closure I needed was the one I was giving myself. The next few days passed quietly. I spent time rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd avoided for too long, and began to unpack all the emotional baggage I'd been carrying. I found a gym that helped me channel my anger into something productive. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in years. And then one evening, Megan called. "I'm ready," she said, her voice full of determination. "I filed for divorce. Jacob's going to have to face the consequences of his actions, just like Alice." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "You deserve so much better, Megan. I'm proud of you." She laughed softly. "We both deserve better." As the months went on, things began to settle. Alice and Jacob were no longer part of my world, and I was slowly finding my way back to who I was before the pain. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the past would crash into me without warning. But I had learned one crucial thing through all of this. I had the power to move on. I had the power to take control of my life again. And I would. Thank you for following this journey. Sometimes, life throws us challenges that feel impossible to overcome, but in the end, we're the ones who choose how we respond. If you've been through something similar or just want to share your thoughts, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to confront the truth in the hardest of ways? How did you move forward? And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. There's always strength in knowing you're not alone.